Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 10. This week, we are going to shift gears a little bit and we are going to get out of the realm of impact evaluations and start talking a bit more about planning and evaluation. Week 9 brought us to the end of our run focusing on impact evaluations. Next week, we will finish up our journey through the various types of evaluations that we have at our disposal with the fifth and final type, cost and efficiency analyses. However, this week, we're going to interrupt our look at evaluative approaches and techniques and skip over to planning and evaluation. These are the steps we take prior to executing an evaluation, which outline the specifics about what we are going to do and how we are going to do it. If that sounds an awful lot like your evaluation plan that you're doing for your final paper, that's because it is. I hope that you will take into account the information that we cover both in lecture here as well as in your chapter and incorporate it into your final paper and use the tips and tricks along the way to prepare a strong product. So, like I said, we're stepping out of our journey through the 5 different types of evaluations. And so I've put our little star in the top left, kind of between the needs assessment and program design and theory evaluation, just to show that right now we're not in this sort of logical linear process where the evaluations build on each other. We're actually outside of the evaluation right now, and we're talking about what it would take to plan one of these evaluations. The evaluation plan, sometimes called the evaluation proposal, is the blueprint for an upcoming evaluation. It should be among the first tasks that an evaluator undertakes when they are commissioned to do an evaluation. It can be used for any type of evaluation: needs assessments, program design and theory evaluations, program implementation evaluations, impact evaluations, and cost efficiency evaluations. Think of it similar to a research plan or a research proposal. The plan outlines everything that needs to be considered and planned for so that the evaluation can be conducted efficiently and effectively. It ensures that everyone involved is on the same page, and it is a great opportunity to engage with stakeholders and allow them to have input. It provides transparency, and it sets the shared expectations. It forecasts time, human and financial resources and considerations, and it can assist with keeping an evaluation on track. All evaluation plans do not look alike. If you do some research for your final paper, you'll start to come across different evaluation plans, and you'll see that some of them approach them with different structures or slightly different perspectives or lenses. However, many of the core components will be similar. The purpose behind the evaluation can shape the form of the evaluation plan. For our purposes, we are going to cover the common components, which you will notice reflect what you are being asked to do in your final paper. The textbook categorizes these into 5 related areas: the purpose and scope, data collection, data analysis, communication, and project management. As we make our way through these areas, think about how they connect to what your final paper is asking you to create. Let's start at the most foundational part of the plan, defining the purpose and scope of the evaluation. The first order of business is to define what type of evaluation is being requested, as that will inform the surrounding conversations. The evaluation may encompass 2 or more areas as well, such as a program implementation evaluation in tandem with an impact evaluation. The stakeholders and commissioners of the evaluation will be suggesting or confirming the type of evaluation that they need for their purposes. Note that they may not use the same language that we do, but if they are asking about, say, whether a program made a change in lives or did it work, this indicates that they are likely after an impact evaluation. Or if they're asking the question, did the program on the ground reflect the program as we developed it? That's looking probably more like an implementation evaluation. Of course, open and frequent communication with these stakeholders will ensure that the evaluator and the stakeholders are on the same page. Now, along the way here, we're going to talk about that stakeholder engagement. I recognize that in your final paper, you don't have an organization to reach out to and survey for what they might need for an evaluation. But I want you to keep in mind that even though you are essentially devising this plan, you would still be cognizant and considerate of the needs of your stakeholders. So still keep them in mind, predicting what they might need, or as you're developing your engagement and your action plans, just remember that to tie the stakeholders back in along the way. In addition to what the stakeholders need or want, the purpose of the evaluation is also heavily shaped by the intended influence it is meant to have. So the influence of the evaluation itself, not even the influence of the program, the influence of the evaluation product. This can look different across different programs. An evaluation may influence the program itself, perceptions of a program, or the program recipients. This influence could be on individuals, such as influencing the buy-in or attitudes of key stakeholders or decision makers. This may look like demonstrating a program is performing well so as to encourage continued support. Or the influence could be on interpersonal behaviors. This may take the form of providing information that will influence ongoing program negotiations between the program operators and administrators. Perhaps the program operators are vying for additional funding or other resources. Demonstrating the impact of the program may help both sides in the debate and negotiation process. Finally, the influence may be directed towards collective actions, which involve multiple stakeholders determining the fate of a program. This information from, say, an impact evaluation may inform decisions about continuing or discontinuing the program, expanding it, modifying and revising it, etc. The use of evaluations to target improvements is probably the most common of all, and it often stems from the program implementation and monitoring evaluations. The overall influence of an evaluation will vary, and often it's related to how far along the program is in its development and implementation. Decisions that need to be made in the near future for which having evaluative results would be beneficial, and any previous evaluations that may have been done and their results. If a program is new, program fidelity may drive the evaluation's purpose. For programs that have already been found to have an impact, a cost efficiency evaluation may be the next pressing need in order to determine whether a program is worth continuing or what could be saved from modifications, given, of course, that those modifications don't compromise the integrity of the change process of the program. At the end of the day, this first step is crucial because before the evaluator can plan their approaches and needs, they need to understand what the end goal of the evaluation is. As I just alluded to, the evaluation's purpose will directly inform the questions that the evaluation will ask. And here's where we get to the research questions or the evaluation questions. Evaluation questions are akin to research questions and direct the evaluator's focus. They capture the purpose of the evaluation in a similar manner as how a typical research question captures the objective of the study. However, remember that a key difference between some research approaches versus evaluation is that despite sharing similarities in approach and even methods, evaluations are a little bit judgy by nature. Rather than only reporting findings, the evaluator also seeks to determine the worth and value of those outcomes. And this will start to be reflected as early as the research questions or the evaluation questions. Evaluation questions may tackle assessing overall group impacts, the outcomes within subgroups. They may seek to determine the underlying mechanisms that make the program work as well as it does, or it may focus on program fidelity and processes. Since I'm asking you guys to look at an impact evaluation for your evaluation plan, the fidelity and processes component probably won't be as heavily weighted in your plan as it would be for, say, a program theory evaluation or an implementation evaluation. Additionally, as you've likely noticed through our course, evaluators are highly focused on the specific. As such, the research questions that will guide an evaluation are custom tailored to the program and reflect the nuances, objectives, and processes of the program. They're highly specific, reflecting careful attention to what is being examined. They capture who the target population is, and they identify the standard for success of the program, what the thresholds will be that allows the evaluator to conclude whether a program has met the standard of success, which may be defined by other studies, professional standards in the field, norms in the field, the research literature, etc. Lastly, keep in mind that these questions, along with the evaluation itself, need to be reasonable, appropriate, or realistic in the given project or program. They need to be answerable. Similar to the reasonableness of a question, good evaluation questions must be able to be answered to some degree of certainty. If the questions are too vague or broad, or they require data that's unavailable or unobservable, they're not answerable. And finally, these questions need to be based on program goals and objectives. It's easy sometimes to be swayed or to get distracted out of curiosity or, in a real world example, by the pressures of the organization. But you need to keep your eye on the target, and the eye of the target, that target is the program goals and objectives. We're seeking to evaluate some capacity of those. While in the past few weeks we've spent considerable time speaking about causal designs, these are not the only ways that evaluators may collect and analyze data in an evaluation. And this will be familiar to almost any of you who have taken methods classes in your respective disciplines. Let's look at the 3 approaches most often used in evaluation. The first are case studies, which in other fields we often refer to as exploratory or as a part of exploratory approaches. More often than not, these approaches are used in the earlier stages of identifying a need area, program and program theory development. They're great for gaining insight into the influences, mechanisms, and nuanced experiences. But at this point, we're not in the business of testing any causal relationships. We're seeking to gather information and understanding and experiences. While I said that they're often used at the beginning stages of program development, they can also be mixed with other more quantitative approaches or other qualitative approaches to kind of flush out some of the detail that is hard to, if not impossible, to capture in quantitative methods. And a lot of that will be determined by what the evaluation questions are and the type of data that is best used to answer those questions. Case studies and related approaches, they can help to gather that nuanced detail so that if you're not only interested in measures of success on, say, scales and rates and quantitative components, but let's say, I don't know, participant satisfaction or an evaluation of the positive or negative that it brought to somebody's life. That's a little bit better served, if you will, through the qualitative side of things. Next, we have descriptive designs, which can provide what are often seen as the simple statistics that quickly summarize and, unsurprisingly, describe the phenomena, or in our case, the outcomes. This may include frequencies and counts, percentages and percent change, reporting on measures of central tendency such as the mean, median, and mode, ranges, standard deviations, etc. And they're calculated using a representative sample of the target population. They provide quick and accurate information and are frequently used in all types of evaluations, from needs assessments through to cost and efficiency evaluations. The key here, again, is that we are not in the land of causal effect. We're looking for associations, we can look for relationships, but we do not have the ability to posit that A caused B with a degree of certainty. Finally, recall that causal designs are almost only used for impact evaluations. Here, as we've been discussing for the past couple of weeks, we're estimating the program effect and controlling for other variables that may contribute to what we initially see as the program's effect. We're trying to isolate the effect of the program and rule out the influence of other variables, or what we called in the past that statistical noise. We want to drill down and tease apart all the competing pieces or influences on our outcome so that we can see as clearly as possible our program caused this outcome. Of course, an evaluation plan doesn't only need to plan for its design and plan for its questions, it also needs to plan for its sample. Within the evaluation plan, we need to address the proposed approach to sampling. We want to capture the type of unit, and this could be individuals, households, schools, etc., and describe the sampling techniques that will be used. Here we need to justify why we are choosing the approach and also note any limitations that may come with it. As a reminder, the sample is simply the subset of units that make up the target population. We want to address any sampling bias that may be present and eliminate as much of that as possible and eliminate as much of the human discretion as possible in sampling. In addition to planning our questions, talking about our samples, and all of these good things, we need to make sure we spend a fair amount of time devoted to defining our measures. Our measures will be the foundational block upon which we are speaking to the outcomes and the program effects. Our plan needs to provide a detailed description of our measures. Part of this is describing the expected direction or valence of the effect. Increased literacy is preferred over decreased, but decreased criminality is preferred over increased. Explicitly stating the valence is an important component to the description of measures. Now, there are cases where the direction is not of great importance, and we can state that. This often applies to the covariates that we might use in a statistical model. Speaking of that, we want to make sure that we include all of our measures, and this is informed by the evaluation design that we have chosen. Some are more simple and will only have a handful of measures. Others will be more complex, controlling for multiple covariates perhaps, or factoring in duration of program exposure or dosage effects. Regardless, the measures list should be exhaustive and care should be given to explaining each in comprehensive detail. Additionally, evaluators should assess and describe the level of subjectivity that their measures will potentially reflect, meaning the degree to which the data might be influenced by, say, those collecting the data, or program personnel, or other influences. This can range from very objective, direct observations and measures made by the evaluative team to more subjective measures, such as surveys, and very subjective measures, such as self-reports, where participants or beneficiaries are asked to reflect and speak to the success or their impressions of the program. Lastly, it's important to keep your eye on the target. Always keep your eye on the target. There are a lot of things that can be on the wish list for the evaluation, but those closest to the true purposes and objectives should take priority in terms of attention, resources, and effort. Okay, so we've written a section, let's say, on our measures. Well, what's next? We need to talk about our data. It should come as no surprise that detailing what kind of data you will need and how you will collect it is intrinsically important to an evaluation plan. Evaluators themselves conduct primary data collection activities for the purpose of that specific evaluation. These activities usually consist of observations, interviews, focus groups and surveys, or direct assessments. The source for each usually include the type of respondent, for example, program participants or caseworkers, or the locus of the data collection, for example, direct observations during the delivery of service, and the method used for the data collection. Primary data is often comprised of observational techniques, experimental techniques, questionnaires and surveys, focus groups and interviews, methods whereby the evaluator or the evaluative team are gathering their own data using methods and instruments that were specifically designed for that intent. That's in contrast to secondary data. Secondary data activities are those that begin by acquiring data from another source that was originally collected for purposes other than the evaluation at hand. Administrative databases are very valuable secondary data sources, and a lot of larger organizations keep some pretty decent data. When data are actually being used for programmatic purposes, such as making payments for delivery of services or as a basis for deciding whether potential clients are assigned to treatment, the data are actually highly likely to be accurate and unlikely to be missing. In other cases, data from secondary sources that is not being used for management or other purposes, such as items on intake forms that are not used for deciding program eligibility or assignment, may often be missing, and it may be missing to a degree where it's not actually useful anymore, or it greatly impacts the reliability and validity of the measures that we're trying to undertake. Wow, my words didn't work there. Secondary data is often collected, like I said, from administrative databases. It can be from routine statistics, regular counts, for example, the daily number of persons in jail or the number of patients in an emergency department, etc. And secondary data is repurposing. We're repackaging data that already exists. It may not always meet our needs the same way as if we had collected it ourselves, but on the flip side, especially if it's accurate and it's complete, it's a huge time saver. Something to weigh into your resources, and especially when you're looking at the timelines and deadlines that you're working with, and what the, best bang for your buck is. Secondary data can be utilized effectively for evaluations depending on the scope and purpose. Again, it all goes back to the objectives and the purpose for the evaluation. So we've been referencing quantitative and qualitative data throughout this, and these different approaches can be combined into mixed methods approaches. Quantitative data is that numerical data. It's quantifying, encoding, and forcing information into measurable and calculable fields. It is most appropriate for large-scale evaluations. It is highly valued by policymakers and high-ranking decision makers who need to have what they may deem more credible evidence to back the decisions they're making and the information they're getting from the evaluation. Quantitative approaches are typically known to provide valid and reliable measures so long as they are completed properly. They, again, like I said, have that perception of credible evidence and being evidence producing. And they do have a greater ability to be replicable, to be able for somebody else to complete the same evaluation using the same steps and come to the same results. Qualitative data, on the other hand, like I've been saying, allows us to get into nuanced understandings and meanings that quantitative data sometimes doesn't allow for. It doesn't have the capacity to capture. Qualitative data might come from speaking to focus groups, or from interviews, or from observing and interacting with the program as it's being delivered. In-house users of the evaluation, so people who are looking to potentially improve the program or find out if people are happy with the program, they may be the more suitable end user of a qualitative-based evaluation. Qualitative-based evaluations are good at representing experiences, capturing perspectives, and they are more flexible and adaptable than their quantitative counterparts, which are more methodologically formulaic. Mixed methods is somewhat of a newer field compared to the strict camps of quantitative and qualitative research. Mixed methods attempts to benefit from both by kind of playing on the strengths of both quantitative and qualitative approaches to be able to provide that empirical evidence, but also add a layer of meaning and understanding through the qualitative perspective. Neither is better. Each is more suitable to depending on the type of evaluation and the stakeholders and the end users of the evaluation and for what the evaluation is asking. So again, just like if you're doing a research plan, the evaluation plan is no different. You need to look at what is the best approach. All approaches may be valid, but some are better choices for the type of evaluation you need to do and for what that particular evaluation and program need to have produced as the end result. So continuing our look at data collection, acquisition, and management, we've talked about our measures, we've talked about the type of data we need and the type of approaches that can help us get our data. Now let's talk about how we actually collect our data. Regardless of whether you are gathering primary or secondary data, and whether it's a quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods approach, the evaluation plan needs to spec out how you will obtain your data. Once the sample and measures have been decided upon, this should be the next step. This is particularly onerous for primary data collection. As we said, you're collecting your own. It doesn't exist and you're not repurposing it from somewhere else. Having a detailed plan for this component is crucial to ensure that you get the data that you need, have the resources needed to collect it at the right time, have the instruments and methods ready to go, and ensure that the data captures the information that you need to answer the questions, that it is tailored to the evaluation, and that at the end of the day, that data is valuable. You might also need to factor in gaining buy-in from the program facilitators, or even more crucially, the program beneficiaries themselves. You might need to train people on how to collect the data and ensure that they are consistent between them. You need contingency plans for when sites or persons don't agree to participate. You might have to jump through some hoops if there are institutional review boards, IRBs, that need to sign off on the approaches. Site visits need to be scheduled. Instruments for the data collection need to be developed or adopted, and the timings need to be worked out to be acceptable to the program provider, but also align with the needs of the evaluation so that you're capturing the right data at the right time. Determinations need to be made about where the data is going, how it will be stored, coded, and prepared for analysis. For large evaluations, managing all of this can be a logistical nightmare in the making. But a sound plan set forth as early as possible in the process can help alleviate some of the problems and challenges that come with this. Okay, so we've decided what our measures are, we've talked about what our stakeholders need, we've defined a purpose, we've reflected the overall objectives of the evaluation, we have collected our data, we have determined the methods by which we're going to collect our data, the type of data we need, the type of methodological approaches we're going to use. And now we have some data. Following a comprehensive data collection section, the evaluator also needs to specify how they plan to analyze the data. This is literally the moment that everything hinges upon. The moment we've been building up to, and the moment that everything that follows will be based upon. Many evaluators will structure this section by essentially proposing the strategies that they will use to analyze the data in response to each evaluation question that was previously identified. So using the evaluation questions to structure this section can make sure that A, you don't miss anything, B, you're leading your stakeholder and your audience through to remind them how what you're doing is reflective of your original purposes and goals and questions being asked. And it just keeps you on track. So I highly recommend that. Feel free to do that in your own work. Use your evaluation questions to structure and respond to with the data analysis. How would you answer these questions from the data you collected using what methods? What methods will give you those answers or allow you to answer those questions? The methods chosen should reflect the designs. So if you've chosen to do a, I don't know, control group design, interviews aren't going to be how you collect your data, and you're probably going to want to do something more sophisticated than just reporting on the proportions who experienced improvement versus not experiencing improvement. The more complex your design is and the more complex your approaches are, and the type of data you've chosen, quantitative, qualitative, and the type of approaches you've used to collect your data, whether it's measurement instruments or participant observations, those are going to all have to match up. So make sure that all of these pieces speak to each other. Like I said, the methods chosen should reflect the designs and be able to feasibly answer the questions at hand. This section looks very different, as you can imagine, depending on whether the data is quantitative or qualitative in nature. Quantitative data is often analyzed using a fairly rigid approach. It's a fairly linear, consecutive approach. I've kind of given a quick little diagram on the left-hand side where each piece is deductive and it builds on the previous step, and each step leads finally deductively to the findings. Qualitative approaches, on the other hand, are a little more like a feedback loop, where one piece may impact the next piece, which impacts the next step, but that next step may then actually jump back up a couple of steps because we realized we need to collect something differently. We're not capturing something. We learned something about our population. So it's often represented actually as a qualitative data or a qualitative spiral because it's a little bit less sequential in its steps, and each step has the chance or the potential to impact not just subsequent steps, but actually previous steps as well. Okay, so we've talked about the different components that need to go into a plan in order to conduct the evaluation. But we also need to outline what happens with the information that we generate from our analysis. The final component of most evaluation plans is a communication plan, which essentially outlines how to move from findings to influence. Perhaps not surprising, the main component of the communication plan is the evaluation report. The communication plan presents the opportunity for evaluators to reach agreement with sponsors and other key stakeholders about the release of findings. The main objective of the evaluation report, and this is the report that would be generated at the end of the actual execution of the evaluation, when you have actually done all the things you said you were going to do in your evaluation plan. The main objective is to answer the research questions in the findings section and assist stakeholders in interpreting the findings, as well as understanding the implications of the findings or any limitations. In order to accurately interpret the findings, stakeholders will need to understand the data, the methods, the processes, all of the pieces that produced the findings. So again, many of you are well versed in research reports and the structure of journal articles. We've read a few throughout the semester. Similar approach here for the evaluation report. You're seeking to answer your research questions. You're seeking to explain the data you used, the methods you used, the processes that you used, and you're trying to package it all up to be shared with the stakeholders and the audience. Now, in our evaluation plan that I've asked you to write, I've called this the dissemination plan. And that's just jargon that I picked up along the way. It refers to the communication plan. They are synonymous. So when you see me say dissemination plan in your evaluation plan assignment, this is what I want you to speak to. I want you to speak to, okay, after we've executed the evaluation, which yes, you aren't doing, but in anticipation that the evaluation would be done, how would you package up the results? Who would you share it with? And to what degree of complexity would you share it? So large, complex, highly technical evaluations for far-reaching, impactful programs will probably be big communication plans. We're talking a very exhaustive, large evaluation report, or it might be broken into smaller pieces like a preliminary report early on, an interim report partway through, and then finally a final report once the program has been running and enough data has been collected over time. A lot of that might be informed by the design, the research design that's being used, or the evaluation design that's being used. It might require longer term data gathering, but stakeholders might want some answers earlier on. Simpler programs, shorter programs, programs where the intervention and the effect are more readily and overtly observable, that might involve a shorter report. It might even be less formal. Also think about the medium of how you're going to share these results. So yes, the evaluation report, the written report, that standard purpose, context, literature review, methods, analysis, results, conclusions, all those sections, that is not always the only way you might need to disseminate the results. Perhaps You're going to also brief the stakeholders, meaning you're going to present a to the point, short, condensed, actionable presentation of the results. Perhaps you're going to speak to community committees and present the report or present the findings. So think a little outside of the box too. When you're looking at your program to do your evaluation plan and you're thinking about how you might disseminate the results, almost all of you will likely have a written report of some kind. But what else might be appropriate? If this is a community-generated program, maybe you'll have to speak to town council. Or perhaps this is funded by a large government or corporate entity. Maybe a briefing for the board members or the high-ranking members might be appropriate. So just think about that. Think about the different ways that you might explain what you found. So like I said, this is going to be familiar to a lot of you that have done a research report at some point in your academic or real life careers. But you're going to basically have 5 components to any evaluation report. You're going to have a section that's covering your objectives and research design. You're going to have a section that's covering your sample and your sampling design. You're going to have a section that's covering your data, another for your measures, and another for your data analysis. The data analysis will also lead to your findings. What did the data analysis tell you? Like I said, not only are evaluation reports the only form of communicating your findings. So briefings and interactions. Think of this as presenting to the community members, presenting to board members of a corporation, presenting to local government, etc. The beauty of briefings or presentations, if you will, is that it lets you cut to the chase. It lets you tell people directly the hard-hitting information. It doesn't rely on them reading an often long and complex and technical report. You can describe the findings. It can help people who might not have the same level of understanding of evaluation and evaluation results. It might help you translate it for them. And it can help generate discussion or questions and focus on those next steps or the implications of the findings. So in addition to all these pieces that we've been speaking about, there's the overall management of the evaluation project that needs to be taken into account. An evaluation plan isn't just setting forth what we need to do and when we need to do it. We also need to account for all of the personnel and resources and timelines and other factors that need to all come together for this evaluation or this potential evaluation to actually come to fruition, to be executed. So the main purpose of accounting for your personnel is to provide sufficient background on those key members of the evaluation team, to make sure that they have the skills that are needed, the time to complete their tasks, to have appropriate oversight as needed, and to make sure that you readily have available people who are competent and have the capacity and the training and the time and everything they need to actually do the evaluation. Because sometimes the evaluation isn't just the evaluator. The larger the evaluation, the more likely you're going to be working with others who are helping, kind of like research assistants. You also need to account for your resources. And this can include equipment and facilities. You can put the relationships that you have with stakeholders or with program staff into this. Relationships can be a resource. For any evaluation plan, this section may include idiosyncratic elements, but a few things are commonly described. When original data collection is needed, the resources need to be listed. So if I need to, for example, I don't know, deliver a survey. Maybe I'm using SurveyMonkey, maybe I'm using another platform. That's a resource. Or maybe I am delivering in-person assessments that the participants need to complete. Well, the assessment and the instrument is a resource, but so is time during the program. So is oversight of the delivery of the assessment. All of these are resources. Sometimes we're using secondary data, administrative data or public use data sets. What do you need available? Do you need specific statistical software to analyze it? Do you need your team to have a specific set of skills? All of this is a resource. Any ingredient that is needed to execute the evaluation plan needs to be outlined and it needs to be accounted for. Think of it as your shopping list to do your evaluation. But your shopping list is people and resources. And finally, timings. Every evaluation will have a timeline. Specific things need to happen in a specific sequence. Some data collection needs to happen early on. Some data collection needs to happen after. Sometimes you need to meet certain milestones that are set forth by the organization or the commissioners of the evaluation. So the timeline is hugely important because it's making sure that everything gets done in an orderly and logical and customized approach for the specific evaluation plan in relation to the program that it's looking at. We're bringing together the steps, the activities, the engagements that need to happen in the order and within the time frames needed to produce the evaluation. There's a few different options, and you're asked to pick one and at least try to come up with a tentative timeline based on your understanding of the program and the evaluation plan you're creating. So there's a couple of different options. There's the traditional chronological timeline. There's what's called a Gantt chart. And there's also line graphs, all of which present a nice visual and allow you to sequence everything that needs to happen in the evaluation within a time frame. And then that makes it easier once you go forward to actually do the evaluation because you know what needs to happen first. You know what you need to do to prepare for the next pieces that need to happen. And it keeps everything on track and it keeps everybody on track, especially if you're working with your stakeholders or with an evaluation team of multiple members. It helps to hold the evaluation process accountable as well, because these are milestones that are being set. by the end of the first month, for example, I plan to have X, Y, and Z completed. This will be done in week 1, this over week 2 and 3, and finally in week 4, we will complete this. Everybody's on the same page. The evaluator knows what they're doing. The people that are directly working on the evaluation know what's coming up and what's expected. And the people that, or the stakeholders that the evaluation plan or the evaluation is for, can see, yep, we're on track, or we're experiencing delays, or we ran into a problem, but everybody's on the same page. So a timeline, and a concrete timeline, a timeline that is sufficiently detailed, can really help the whole evaluation process stay on track and go a bit more smoothly. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it really does help the whole process go a little bit more smoothly. So like I said, there's a few different options, and I just want to take a quick look at these. I want to highlight that any of these options are appropriate for you to choose. You only need to choose one to include with your evaluation plan. You may not necessarily have a large timeline, or you may have one. Think about the scope of your evaluation plan. Could it be done in a few months? Or are we talking about a multi-year process? Keeping all your ducks in a row, short-term and long-term, is pretty important. So like I said, these 3 different options are great examples of a study timeline, and there are templates all over the internet that can be downloaded, and you can just plug in your components, which is really a time saver. You don't have to use a template, you can create your own, but just keep these in mind, and then use the resources that you have available. So a chronological list is exactly what it sounds like. So you're creating a list from the beginning steps through to the fruition and conclusion of the evaluation. An example is on the screen right now. You're coordinating it off by dates. The dates should be in chronological order. And in this particular one, they have a nice little color-coded bar on the left-hand side to show you dark blue is your January activities. It looks like they're working for about 10 days in January. And then February, they really start to kick it off, and they're collecting their data, they're doing some pre-surveys, etc. throughout the month. And then finally in March, they're bringing it all together. They're finishing their data collection with some interviews. They are analyzing that data over a 2-week period between March 1st and 14th. Over another week, they're drafting up a data session. 14 to 26, they're doing a funder report, which I'm going to assume is essentially their evaluation report, their end product, their written product. And it looks like they actually have a presentation coming up. So after they've written the report, they're going to condense down and summarize their findings into a board presentation. It is intuitive. It's almost like a checklist. You can keep on track. You can easily export it over into a calendar if you needed to. So the chronological list is not the most flashy by any stretch, but it is a workhorse. So feel free to use a chronological list when you're outlining the timeline for your evaluation plan. Then we have the Gantt chart. Gantt charts were actually what I was first introduced to in the evaluation world. And it just basically is a table, a color-coded table, a matrix that allows you to see overlapping activities very well. So in this case, again, we have an example here. They have 4 sections along the left-hand side for planning, data collection, analysis, and reporting. Within each, they have 3 activities that need to be done. As you might expect, because planning comes before data collection comes before analysis comes before reporting, the planning happens more immediately, weeks 1, 2, and 3 it looks like. And then data collection overlaps and starts to take over in February. And then in February through March, we have our analysis followed by our reporting. If you notice though, what's kind of neat about it is it lets you see those overlapping activities well and see where sometimes you might have a piece that needs to happen early and a piece that happens later. So if you look at the pre-post survey, in week 3 they're doing their pre-survey, it looks like, and in week 6 it looks like they're doing their post survey. That lets you see horizontally what happens there, but it also lets you see that the pre-post survey in week 3, we're also collecting some administrative data in week 3, and we're conducting interviews in week 3. So the team, the stakeholders, the people we're answering to, everybody knows that week 3 is going to be a busy week, and there's multiple capacities of the evaluation that need to get done. We're not just planning, we're not just collecting data, we're actually in the planning stage, we're also in the data collection stage in week 3, and we're also starting our analysis stage in week 3. The more a week is stacked up, the more easily it is that you can see just how busy and complex that week is going to be. So week 6, I don't envy that team. Week 6 in March, they're going to be incredibly busy. All hands on deck, it looks like. So knowing who's going to do what, who's in charge of what resources need to be set up ahead of time, having all of that fleshed out, they can do that because they can clearly see all of the components that need to be executed week by week by week. I like doing them by week. Gantt charts keeps you accountable, keeps you on track. You can extend things over multiple weeks. For example, if you look at their administrative data collection, it's week 2 through 5. We can clearly see that. You can extend this. So if this is a like 2.5-ish month evaluation, if it was longer, you would just keep tagging them on. If you had additional pieces that needed to be addressed for data collection or analysis, you would add them there. This is just a really nice example of ensuring that you account for everything on time and within the timelines that it needs to happen. The one thing that I do wish was included in this Gantt chart are touch points for stakeholder engagement. Not all evaluations need frequent communication, but some do. Some benefit from having frequent conversations with the stakeholders. So for me, I would also potentially include almost an administrative section on the left-hand side, either before planning or at the bottom, somewhere outside of the sequence of events, just to remind you for some of these things. Touch points with stakeholders, or I don't know, if you have to do any media work, anything that doesn't really fit into the actual evaluation but should be done within the same time frame as part of the evaluation, as almost a courtesy, if you will. Any of those activities you can also put in there. I just keep them separate just to ensure that it's not making the Gantt chart more convoluted than it needs to be. So Gantt chart, like I said, there are templates online if you're interested in taking a crack at one of these. And if it's not one that you think is suitable for your evaluation plan, no pressure to use this one. The last one I just want to talk about is the line graph. It's a line-based temporal timeline visual, if you will. So it's a little messed up on our example here, but you can see at the bottom they have January, February, and March. Again, just like we've been doing for all of them, they have chosen to color code each month with a different shade of blue. So that's kind of nice, just to help the eye differentiate what needs to happen when. And each arm that comes out from the main linear line is representative of an activity within the evaluation. These can look beautiful. These can also become overwhelmingly complicated to read because they can become very cluttered very fast. So for shorter projects, these work really well. So like, again, this one is about, 2.5 months of evaluation. You can fit that onto a line fairly nicely. Remember, you only have so much width of a piece of paper, the margins of your page. Even if you were to flip the orientation to landscape to get a little bit more room, and landscape does work, orientation, by the way, does work really great with these timelines. But if you have a very long-term project where you need to cover not 2.5 months worth of evaluation, but say 2.5 years, you're probably not going to fit it all on a nice linear spread. It's either going to be so cramped that you're not going to be able to read it, and it defeats the purpose of clearly communicating the timelines upon which the evaluation needs to take place, or you're going to end up breaking it into separate chunks where you say you do 3 months and then you create another one below it for the next 3 months, and so on and so forth. And again, it kind of starts to defeat the purpose of being able to clearly see all at once what needs to happen and when. So keep that in mind, depending on what your evaluation is looking like, because while I like the looks of them, I find them very intuitive to follow, it's not always the best choice for more complex and longer running evaluations. And that brings us to the end. If you notice, we've talked about things in a slightly different order than I've asked you to do in your paper, but I wanted to make sure that we covered each piece conceptually. The book covers them in the same order as I did in this slide deck, so that if you're using it as a resource, which I really, really advise, they have some great material in there for helping. I just wanted to make sure that my lecture and the textbook lined up in the same order. I would recommend taking a look at journal articles, especially that have conducted an evaluation, and you can kind of see what the end would look like for what an evaluation report would look like. But I also recommend you Google around a bit. They're probably not in journal articles. They're probably on the program websites more often than not, or sometimes on government agency websites if it's a government program. But look for a few different evaluation plans. Just type into Google, social program evaluation plan. Or if you know kind of the area you're interested in, for example, substance abuse evaluation plan, program evaluation plan. And just take a look at a couple of examples. Do not use them. This is supposed to be your own material. You know this. We've talked about plagiarism. We've talked about the expectations of that you're finding a program to write your own evaluation plan for. But it doesn't mean you can't look at other ones to see how they did it and mimic things you like about it. Or if you're unsure about how to maybe word something, or whether to use headings or whether not to use headings, There's no hard and fast rule for format other than I want you to write this as a formal paper with a formal narrative using APA citations where appropriate and reference list at the end. So why reinvent the wheel? Or if you're unsure of kind of whether you like the style that you're using, just take a look at how some other people have done it. There's a million ways to do this, which is both overwhelming and encouraging because it means there's a lot of options and a lot of choices and a lot of flexibility. I would recommend keeping it clear. Remember, you're leading your reader through a journey. You're telling them essentially a story, a very nuanced, technical, somewhat nerdy story about how you would conduct an evaluation for a particular program. But give them the context they need, give them some headers, and by them I mean me, some headers. Lead me through your process. Lead me through everything I need to know so that, you know what? Say you were hired to be the evaluator and you put together this evaluation plan. And say for whatever reason you got pulled onto another project and it was up to me to execute your plan. It should be so detailed that for the most part, I don't actually have to do a lot of thinking. I can take it on and know what I need and what I'm going to do and who I need and what resources I need and what timelines and what questions I'm answering, all from this document because you've given me the blueprint. As always, I am available to chat. If you have questions, shoot me an email. If you want to get together, like I said, we're not going to have in-person lectures for the rest of the semester, but if you want to meet, send me an email. I'll come in during class time as normal and we can meet and talk about your project if you want. I'm still available. I just figure our time is better used since most of us were attending remotely anyway. I know the end of the semester is a busy, busy, busy time. And yeah, I'm just trying to give you a bit more flexibility to your schedule. But I'm still here if needed as a resource. Don't hesitate to reach out. All right, guys. So next week, again, no in-person class. We'll show up I will show up to talk about the project or anything else. If you want, just send me an email so I know that somebody wants to come in. And lastly, we will be on the other side of our chapter switch. So we covered, I believe, chapter 11 this week. So we're going to cover chapter 10 next week. Have a great week, and I hope to hear from some of you, and I really look forward to reading these papers when they come in. All right, have a great week, everybody.